happy to be here. The topic is really exciting, and I'm going to offer some insights into gestural communication. I'm not sure I have a lot of answers with me, but I might have more questions, or I might point to certain aspects that are particularly important or have become important in my own view of multimodal communication. Now, this is a little low here. I wonder whether, I'm sorry for this little, no, I can't. Okay, well, maybe I can just do it like this, because I cannot really read my slides, but it's okay. Okay, so points of departure. As a linguist, I'm interested in language. The understanding of language that we are working with in our group is multimodal. For many linguists, language is linguistic, and aspects of what is sometimes called nonverbal communication. These aspects don't really belong to the scientific study of language. And of course, we are not really happy with that view, and gesture researchers have to do a lot of work to convince linguists that it is worthwhile to look at gesture, and that gestures actually do important semiotic work in communication. Okay, language is motivated. That means we assume that language is not exactly arbitrary, as Saussure said, but it's motivated, so we are taking a more Jacobsonian approach to language. That means iconicity does play a role in other forces and factors in communication. And language is mimetic. I cannot really go into details here, but there's a lot of exciting work also by my thesis advisor, Linda Waugh, on iconicity in language. And so I'll just briefly talk about that. Now, for some of you, you might have already looked at gesture, co-speech gesture, and others might not have. So I'm just going to try to characterize this semiotic system just briefly here. It's dynamic, which poses sometimes problems. We do need to we need a secondary medium to capture gesture, video, for example, to then really analyze it very in great detail. It's a visual corporal medium, and it's 3D, so it actually, gestures do involve in 3D space. Doesn't make it easier for us to describe gesture. Then I'm going to look at co-speech gesture. So it is there is some alignment and some cooperation with language, spoken language. So again, language communication is multimodal. Then gestures are rather spontaneous. That's also quite important because we do not really expect people to plan their gestures unless you learn a speech by heart, and then you also try to for your pronuncio, you also try to place your gestures very carefully. Language is also rather unconscious and spontaneous, the production of language, because we do not plan our sentences ahead of time either. But gestures are really, unless we have maybe a novice in a second language and we go to the bakery and really just have our sentences, you know, in the head, what we want to do, and then we pray that the words will come out the way we want it to. But we cannot be sure, right? And gestures are even more spontaneous and less monitored than language. And that's why we think gestures are so interesting, and they can tell us something about the less monitored aspects of cognition and communication. So they are fluid, they emerge and vanish in time and space. Temporal structure, very important. Language is dynamic and temporal as well, spoken language. So now in gesture research, we do look at the synchrony of gesture and speech. Okay, mimicry. So of course, there are also mimetic gestures. So far in my own work, I probably talked more about iconic gestures, but I guess some of them are also mimetic. So this invitation gave me the opportunity to think a little bit more about mimicry in gesture and not just iconicity. So, but language and gesture together do help us to perform these mini multimodal acts when we speak to other people and interact. And I'm going to show you some iconic aspects of gestures and also indexical aspects, because I've worked a lot on metonymy, which is based on contiguity and indexicality, and that's something that indexicality is often a little neglected next to iconicity. So indexicality is important, indexical anchorage of a speech act, and also metonymy is also important. I only talk about briefly that about metonymy. Okay, so mimetic of what would be also a question I would ask, of what, are we mimicking when we use gesture? Do we imitate a good friend of ours, or do we just say, and then I ran into the classroom, or what do we mimic? Do we mimic something that we have seen in the real world, or do we actually have aspects there that are more based on mental imagery? And natural and cultural media. Our group is called Natural Media and Engineering. That's a term that Ludwig Jäger coined. Maybe some of you know Ludwig Jäger, who was one of the main Antragsteller of our project. And what do we mean by natural media? Well, spoken language, all the natural non-mediated means that we have to communicate. And spoken language, some of our group members work also on sign language, but the focus is really on co-speech gesture. We cannot look at everything at the same time, even though we would love to, and also the complexity of human communicative behavior, of course, comprises gaze, head movements, body posture, and all that. But we do need to focus on certain combinations. And just to briefly give you an idea of what we are looking at, we are working with an embodied approach to language, using the theory of the embodied mind. Embodied cognitive-semiotic principles, I say a little bit more about that, but we are interested in the motivated sign formation of gestures and the interpretation of gestures as well. And so image schemas, iconicity, and I mentioned indexicality, metaphor, metonymy are important for us. Situations, we do have several mini sub-projects, so we do study face-to-face communication, but also clinical situations, people with autism or schizophrenia, how do they interpret gesture, and we do their work with brain imaging methods. And one postdoc looks at technologically mediated gestures. That means we are trying to develop a natural vocabulary for gesture-based interfaces. So that's why we are called Natural Media and Engineering, and Aachen is a technical university, and our mission is to be multidisciplinary and build bridges across campus. So that's what we are trying to do. So some of us are just linguists and semioticians and have studied gestures and have analyzed videos forever, and so we bring that expertise to the group. And others are better at designing studies to actually look at people's behavior in a more controlled way. Okay, natural media of communication. This is not what we study, but I use this image here because it's such a typical example of an indexical gesture according to Peirce. So there's a footprint, that means an impact, and there was a contiguity relationship, and what do we have? We just have the sign left, and then we have to infer from that what did actually cause the sign to be there. And of course, I looked a little bit now that I was supposed to talk about mimicry, I looked a little bit for these beautiful images. And what I would like to point out right from the start is that, okay, this is of course, an iconic transformation and adaptation to the environment, but it's also highly indexical, because without the indexical anchorage, as I always say, maybe there are also other words for it, but this would not work. This semiotic process would not work. We would not be able to interpret this correctly if we didn't have the context and this two insects, one friendly and one mimicking the not so friendly version is also interesting, but without that anchorage within the functional environment, it wouldn't really work either. Okay, so there are several forms of gestural expression and language. And Adam Kendon is one of the founding fathers of gesture studies. He has also worked on interaction, very insightful analyses. So he put together what David McNeil, University of Chicago, a linguist and a psychologist, called the Kendon continuum. So these two names are the big names in gesture studies for those of you who would like to look up some work and fundamental work. Those names are really important. And with our work and what I'm going to talk about, we're going to situate ourselves here at gesticulation. So that means free gestures, spontaneous co-speech gestures. Pantomime, of course, is also important for mimicry. We have not worked on pantomime ourselves. Emblems are culturally codified gestures when you go like, okay, that was great, or head nodding, yes, shaking, no. It's all cultural. It's not universal, really, the meaning. There are also interesting papers on that. And then, of course, sign language is a highly codified, conventionalized system in language by itself. So it's also multimodal. There are mouthings and other movements that are significant, but we'll be looking at gesture. Now, I'm going to give you the first example just to show you a little bit about the imagery of gesture and the alignment of gestural imagery in speech. Because when you hear co-speech gesture, which is a technical term almost, you do expect the gesture to be co-speech and to maybe express exactly what the speech expresses in that moment. But it's not that easy, of course. You know, sometimes the gesture comes first, sometimes the speech comes first, and sometimes it's very nicely aligned. So why don't you look at this and you look at what comes first? I'm not sure whether the contrast is so great. Is that okay? Or could you turn, since there are these Scheinwerfer, maybe we can, I don't know. This is a person in our lab. Sorry, this is not loud enough. Oh, let's see. This is our motion capture lab, the natural media lab, and this person is talking about Vienna and Aachen and what she liked about Vienna and what she liked about Aachen when she came to Aachen, kind of small and the usual things. But then she actually made friends in Aachen, and that's kind of nice. So she's talking about that, and just look at her gestures. I hope you can hear it.
Country, you know, and I love the city of Vienna. But like right now, you know, I feel like I've kind of made a circle of friends here, and you know, I'm like a little bit settled. I've been here now for 9 months, I guess, and so I'm happy to actually stay here because I still get to be abroad, but I still kind of get to be a little bit settled, you know.
So what's important here was some indexical gestures about places, and then the circle of friends, which you probably have seen, right? Did the circle of friends come before or after the lexical affiliate, as you could say? Remember? Ha! See, it's all merged, yeah. This is how, yeah, it came before. I play it again. Yeah, it was like, I made a...
Country, you know, and I love the city of Vienna. But like right now, you know, I feel like I've kind of made a circle of friends here, and you know, I'm like a little bit settled. I've been here now for 9 months, I guess, and so I'm happy to actually stay here because I still get to be abroad, but I still kind of get to be a little bit settled. You know?
So, and the circle comes back like this in the end, even though she doesn't talk about circles anymore. You know, so it's very complex, a lot going on. We have to go on as well. I reviewed the literature on mimicry and gesture, where the word mimicry is really used as a concept. And this is one of the definitions. I'll show you some more later on, just to give you an idea of how gesture researchers approach the idea of mimicry. And so here, Irene Mittelberg, a PhD student from the McNeil Group, Chicago, she defined gestural mimicry as recurrence of the same or similar gesture across speakers. So that means across speakers, there's already this interaction that I think this group is also really interested in. So that means, of course, we also look at recurrence of imagery across a stretch of speech, you know, that is produced by one speaker, but then gestural mimicry in interaction means that my vis-a-vis actually takes up some of my gestural elements. And she mentions 3 aspects of mimicry. First of all, this is not what we could call an automatic repetition, but depends for its occurrence on the interlocutor's semantic decoding of the speaker's gesture. So you can see here that the interlocutor is really important in order to establish the relationship between these semantic modes, right? And then pick up some of the meaningful elements in his or her own speech. So there is this interaction going on. A gesture can make salient those aspects of what is being talked about. So salient is also really a nice concept, really important also in cognitive linguistics, and influence the way in which the interlocutor comes to represent and so to conceive of the same referent. It's quite complex, there's a lot in there, you know. So a gesture can make salient the circle of friends, those aspects of what is being talked about, you know, that's really important to her friends, circle of friends, there's some kind of spatial arrangement in space, and influence the way in which the interlocutor comes to represent and so to conceive of the same referent. That means if I now sit across this woman and I also start talking about circles of friends or, you know, and make the same gesture, then I have this shared understanding, and the gesture is actually part of the semiotic material that helps us to build that shared understanding. The idea of common ground comes from Herb Clark, a really interesting scholar from Stanford. And so that means that we do have some common ground, that means some common knowledge we can assume, but within a conversation we do build common ground. That means shared knowledge and shared insights, and we construct meaning and in these jointly fabricated processes of meaning making. So that's also an aspect I think that's of interest here. And then this coordination aspect, of course, that the interlocutors coordinate, not only in talking about things, but also in this communicative behavior. I think behavior is really important to say. Gestures are behavior. They are communicative behavior, functional behavior, right? It's probably an important point. Performance, multimodal acts. You might have wondered what Cognitive-Semiotic stands for. There is a field now that's called Cognitive-Semiotics, and it has a journal and so forth. In my own work, I have come to this because I have worked with Peirce's framework and Jacobson's framework, speech functions, matter for metonymy. Charles Sanders Peirce already puts the focus on the interpreter, the person who actually builds up the meaning in his own head and body. And then since I've been working also in cognitive linguistics, I have used some of the useful notions from cognitive linguistics and of course previous gesture research. But the interesting thing is that gesture research is accepted in the circle of cognitive linguistics much more than in any other linguistics circle. So because there they can see that looking at this wider idea of communication makes a lot of sense, and that gestures are also linked to mental imagery, of course, and conceptual images, and sometimes they can even tell you more about of somebody's understanding spontaneously than the speech. Okay, definitions of gesture. The first comes from Adam Kendon, who says that gesture is a name for visible action when it's used as an utterance or a part of an utterance. So that this idea of utterance, of course, is central here, and visible action that is meaningful. Then Cornelia Müller, who is a gesture researcher in Berlin and at the Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder, she defined gestures, and I have translated this into English here. Gestures are communicative movements of the hands and arms which express, just as language, speakers' attitudes, feelings, and intentions, and establish, next aspect, the social order of conversational interactions. So there's a lot. You have ideas, you can tell stories about what happened to you, you use gestures, you have memories, of course, that you recount, tell with the help of gestures, feelings, and attitudes and intentions, and so forth. So it's very rich, and of course, gestures are completely underestimated. You know, people do not think that they can do all this, and a lot of people think it's just random hand movement or it's expression, emotional expression, but gestures can do a lot more. Okay, then again, categories. We need categories in order to look at gestures and categorize them, but they are so multifunctional that it's very hard to categorize them. So David McNeil here has established this typology, which has been used very widely in gesture research. And for us, these are quite important iconics because they imitate things, actions, people. Cornelia Müller is her typology is a little bit more functional. She distinguished between referential gestures, performative gestures. Yeah, I can beg you to listen to me, for example, performative. And discursive means I can give comments on my own discourse. You know, or I can say something and brush off, not so important, or forget about it. Yeah, so we have this meta-linguistic function also, meta-discursive function. Okay, and interactive is very important as well. There's not too much work on interactive gestures, and Bavelas and her colleagues have done work on that. Now, how do we talk about the objects or the actions that we want to imitate or that we want to mimic? What are our techniques of representation? And there again, Cornelia Müller in her 1998 book, which is one of the ground-laying books in German on gesture, distinguishes between different modes of representation. So we can enact something. I can pretend to open a window or drive the car, and you can see immediately what I'm saying, what I'm talking about. We can sculpt. That means I can talk about an object, and I can make a 3D sculpture, basically. It's all of imaginary objects, of course, right? So we do need the speech in order to disambiguate our gestures. Gestures are very polysemous. And drawing, I can draw something in the air, and I bought myself a picture frame, and I go like this. This is a classic example in gesture studies, a picture frame. And you see that the attribute, the modifier, that this is a rectangle picture frame, was only in my gesture. So you see that there is some interaction between the two. So drawing is like tracing, and of course these traces are invisible, you know, so this is not so easy for gesture researchers to keep track of all these imaginary objects, actions, traces, and so forth. And representing, that means my hands can become I can become somebody else, talking about mimicking. I can imitate somebody else with my entire body. But my hands can also become objects. So this can be a piece of paper, and this can be a pen, making notes. So my body actually gives me semiotic resources to talk about things in the world and to also create them in speech, create new ideas, and then work with that semiotic material. Of course, as I said, there is work on linguistic not linguistic, well, you can maybe say verbal mimicry. And that is sound symbolism. I'm sure you're aware of this. That means the sound of the word actually imitates the sound that I'm referring to, whether it's an animal call or something else. For example, to sizzle, pop, knister, and scission. That means you have these qualities of the sound that actually tells you something about what you're talking about. And that's called iconicity in language, for those of you who are not aware of this. And there is work on this. I find this really interesting. Iconicity everywhere, in the lexicon, in morphology, and in syntax, and so forth. And this goes against arbitrariness and Saussure's claim that there is no intrinsic, no natural link between a word and a concept, so there's nothing tree-ish about the word tree, right? But there are, of course, also other words that are more iconic, and in syntax, the order of events in the world, if you exactly phrase your sentences so that the sequence of events also is is displayed in your sentence in the same way, then it's also, there's some iconicity, there's relational iconicity, which is also diagrammatic iconicity. So that means iconicity can also be abstract, can be relational, can be structural. And that's also a point of iconicity that is a little underestimated, even though there has been now publications on diagrams on diagrams in philosophy, language, and other semiotic systems. Okay. Now, I would show some videos. Of course, I had to work with the videos that we had already, so I didn't have time to conceive of a study on these issues. But I think what I'm hoping to offer here is a better understanding of what gestures can do. And then you, as mimicry scholars, you can read things out of it, into it, and use the aspects that you find helpful. So Peirce, also because in the proposal I read, I saw that you place a heavy emphasis on the addressee, on the receiver, and not just the person signaling or communicating. And in Peirce's theory, this is already inbuilt, so that means the focus is already on the interpreter. That means the person reading the signs. So like the footsteps and the footprints on the sand, if nobody comes by and looks at these footsteps, there's no semiosis, there's no semiotic process, right? And of course the animal didn't mean to leave those signs behind, yeah? But what you need is this triangle of Peirce, you know, you need your sign, that means the semiotic sign carrier, that's a gesture or a word or footprints. And then you need that which it refers to. This is the animal passing by or the circle of friends. Yeah? But this can only be put together and make sense in the mind of the interpreter. And this reaction in the mind is called interpretant, not to be confused with the person, the interpreter. So that means this interpretation is really happening in the person's mind. Okay, I think I'm not going to go into this definition of Peirce, but maybe just to show that this very traditional theory can actually offer insights into these questions, maybe is also rooted in the fact that Peirce already saw thought as highly social and as a dialogue, and that was for Roman Jakobson very important as well, so that learning and thought actually comes about in interaction, whether it's the infant and the caretaker, or later on learning, and you know, it's a dialogue. So that's really important. And now I would like to show you where we're gonna zoom in. So icon, index, symbol, I think this triad is quite known. Those are the relationships between the signs and the objects they stand for. Objects can be feelings, actions, knowledge, anything, colors. And I would like to point out that in verbal mimicry, of course, verbal mimicry is highly symbolic because you have a linguistic system. That means when I say sizzle or zischen, these sounds that imitate what they are referring to need to fit into the phonological system of a specific language. You know? So there is some transformation and adaptation within the system. So it's highly symbolic, and gestures are not as symbolic because gestures are not a highly symbolic closed system. We, as gesture researchers, we are trying to find out more about the systematicity behind gestures and the motivating principles, such as iconicity and indexicality, but we cannot really compare gesture with language. I mean, we can compare sign languages with spoken languages, but not gesture. And this is why, from my point of view, I have decided not to work with linguistic categories for my gesture research and impose them onto gesture, but to use a wider semiotic perspective, which is given by Peirce and Jakobson, because they do not only look at language, even though language is the semiotic system par excellence, but they provide us with these terms and with these modes, these relationships between the world and signs and semiotic structure. So gesture mimicry then is more iconic and more natural And it's also very metonymic because it's partial in the sense that gestures actually are very abstract at the same time, because you don't have much time to produce a very discrete gesture. Gestures are they are illusions. They are partial, and that's why I have devoted quite a bit of time to look at the metonymic aspects of gesture. Not just metaphoric, there's a whole literature on metaphors and gesture, but metonymy as well. So this is icon index symbol, and similarity and analogy, those are the terms that are important for mimicry. And that means there's some shared qualities between the sign and that which it represents, yeah, like the picture frame, for example, or the action that I'm imitating. And that can be shape or sound, taste, organization. So you have these subtypes of the icon. And I think this is really important because image iconicity means that there is a high degree of mimetic relationship. Image iconicity, those are rich images like a photograph, or I guess that you have a lot of iconic information. And then there is like some abstraction. So a diagram is just the relationship between two things that you point out, whether it's a map or whether you draw a diagram with your gestures. And metaphors are, of course, important and often based on iconicity, but not often. So maybe it would also be interesting to think about mimicry and metaphor. Okay, index is contiguity, factual relationship, pointing gestures. I point at something, so my sign is affected by the thing I'm pointing at. Classical examples are footprints and smoke and fire. You see the smoke and you know that the object that it refers to must be close by. And then symbol, this is habit, so, and conventionality. And of course that's important too in cultural studies. You are looking at symbolic behaviors and symbols, and of course you can look at slang gestures or, you know, like group gestures that are also important in order to create an identity and that people imitate each other in a group so that they feel closer and that they feel belonging to the group. So you need to be able to learn the code also of nonverbal behavior in order to fit in. Okay, now similarity is what I think is the most important aspect here today. So regarding all these different aspects, and I guess that these mimetic acts here in different sign systems are heavily based on some kind of similarity. And what's important again here is, in Persian terms, is that it's a perceived similarity. That means somebody has to perceive the similarity. Or if you think of this worm that looks like a piece of, or like a branch, you know, you have to perceive the similarity and you have to be deceived yourself. That means your sense organs, you know, they interpret what they see and then you make meaning out of that. And this is, again, this perspective of Peirce, and I guess to taste and to feel and tactile exploration of the world, all that is also very important in gesture. So just to give you this one original definition by Peirce about the icon, icons have qualities which resemble those of the objects they represent. So there's resemblance between the worm and the branches. And they excite analogous sensations in the mind. Okay, so something to think about, analogous sensations. That means we can map this onto some known concept we have, some conceptual structure, some memory, something that we have felt before. You know, so this similarity helps us to find coherence in the world because we can see recurrent resemblances, which are then at some point develop into patterns, which give us orientation and understanding, and also help us to see when these patterns are disrupted, creatively, hopefully. Okay, so I'll give you an iconic example of iconic gestures now. This is the, David McNeil does base his typology partly on Peirce, but he never really says exactly how. But he does say that these iconic metaphorics, didactics are based on Peirce. So they provide images of a concrete entity or an action. That means something concrete that we have seen, that we have touched, that we have experienced is being represented in the gesture. Okay? So that means the gesture kind of imitates probably certain aspects of something that we have seen. This looks a little strange, but in order for subjects coming into our labs, we have all these regulations, and some of them want us to be anonymous, so we have to cover the head. I just want to give you an example of this. This is a part of a larger study on metonymic modes in gesture and looking at gestural actions that we can then use for gesture-based interfaces, but that doesn't matter. What I want you to see here is that we ask, I don't know how many people, to perform the same actions. And of course there is similarity across speakers, and we gave them before and after pictures. And in this scenario, we showed them a picture of an apple, a whole apple, on a plate, and then next time a cut apple cut into slices on a plate. And we said, what do you have to do go from here to there? And we had like 16 scenarios like this. And then we just see what happens on how people behave. And this is what she did.
To slice the apple by holding it down.
PowerPoint cuts off the last couple of seconds of video clips.
To slice the apple by holding it down and cutting or...
Okay, now gesture researchers are interested in what is being done here. How is the apple being represented and the cutting action? So did you see the apple? She was holding the apple. She was holding the apple and she was holding the knife like this, right? And then the cutting action. That's one thing. That was something where we say, okay, the hand is that's the action mode. And I would say external metonymy because there's contiguity between the hand and the imagined apple according to using Jacobson's modes. This person does it completely different. You can see what happens here.
Into cut the apple.
Okay, here the hand is the apple and the hand is the blade. Yeah. So this would be for us internal metonymy because this is internal representation of an object. Now, this person did not come into our lab. This person is a famous architect, Norman Foster, who built a beautiful gallery in New York City, in Manhattan. And I found this online. And I'm interested in how people talk about space and architectural space. And I'm working with architects right now, looking at how we can use this knowledge about gestures to bring this to architecture students and help them develop a sense of 3D space and creating these spaces and working with their own concepts and feeling them in their hands. So this is Norman Foster, who's talking about this gallery. And these are just examples to show you some iconic dimensions and what happens in gesture. And of course, this is a 25-foot gallery. Of course, you have to bring it down to human scale, and you have to see how he does that. It's all flexible, relative, subjective.
It's a 25-foot wide slot, so it's very tight. That means that it's a vertical gallery. So
it's a gallery for contemporary art, that's what he says. So, when he says wide like this, and it's a very tight slot, this is not a gesture for tight, right? This is really, but for him, this is a tight slot in relation to other buildings that he has built, right? So he's talking about some dimensions and how can a person talk about space like this, so it's interesting to see what he does there. This is an elevator. So they didn't have much space. So when you walk in, you come in and you are underneath the elevator with which paintings and people are transported up and down. And here I would like to draw your attention to the idea of viewpoint. And and David McNeil has worked about this and others. Viewpoint in gesture is really important because I have to see how much time I have. I still have time. Because when you talk about something that you have seen, like David McNeil bases his research on cartoon stories. I mean, he shows people cartoon stories like Tweety Bird and Sylvester and lets people retell these cartoons. So these are all cartoon gestures, actually. And here, he's talking about this experience of space, and he is mimicking the feeling of walking into the space and looking up to the elevator in the end. So first he talks about, this is more metaphorical, about the thrust of this architecture and the edginess. And then he's, at the end, giving you this look up to the elevator. So this is what you can do. You can, when you talk about something, or when gestures want to mimic something, they can do this. They can take on the perspective of the person they are mimicking, right? Or they can take a third-person perspective and describe things from a more from a distance.
We very much enjoyed the kind of the thrust of that, the edginess, the unexpected. I mean, it is the last place you'd think you'd ever really want to be in any building is underneath the elevator. Underneath the elevator, that's where you don't want to be. I have to show this again because the last bit is this, what I want to show. We very much enjoyed the kind of the thrust of that, the edginess, the unexpected. I mean, it is the last place you'd think you'd ever really want to be in any building is underneath the elevator, you know, fine. Like this. Now what he's looking at, this is this one shot, so there's the subjective viewpoint, and as I said, you can be more or less subjective, and you can, you know, mimic somebody else from his or her own perspective, or you can just give a more distant display of this. So this is what he's looking at. So you walk in, and this is what you see. You are really underneath this elevator, so he goes like this. So he's mimicking his own experience doing this, but you know, you don't know. Maybe he has seen people do this, so maybe he's mimicking other people. I mean, it's hard to say. Metaphorics, this is, as I said, really, really fascinating. I have the feeling that I cannot go too much into this, but there is a huge literature on metaphorics. I myself, I have tried to bring together conceptual metaphor theory and Peirce, and then look at gestures. I videotaped for my dissertation research some time back, linguistics professors in classrooms talking about linguistic theory, and see what happens. So, and I can tell you their gesture all the time. The moment, you know, they can point at things, but the moment they turn to the audience, they recreate these abstract structures and categories. They hold them, they place them, they move them, they send them. They become syntactic tree structures themselves. Okay. Now, this is one example of an American linguist talking about constituents of a sentence. And she is reaching into some kind of imaginary constituent, which is probably some kind of imaginary container, and she's pulling out something. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that people are in these abstract realms, knowledge domains, and they interact with these things as if they were real things. So, you know, of course she is mimicking some kind of reaching action, but there's a lot more going on.
So invite sister is a constituent, but we can reach into it and pull out
a subconstituent. So reach into it and pull out a subconstituent, right? Okay, so that means she really interacts with these abstract categories that she's talking about. And because I find diagrams so interesting, I'm going to show you one more example of a diagram, which, as I said before, is one type of image iconicity according to Peirce. And of course, I should say that according to Peirce, all these modes interact at all times. That's really important as well. So there's no wonder that mimicry not only includes iconicity, but also indexicality and symbolicity. And it makes sense to tease these things apart, even though sometimes that's really difficult. So you probably have seen at some point, at least some of you who have ever read some linguistics textbook, Chomsky and tree structures, you know, generative grammar, they have these tree structures. And here you can see how these people describe these conventional diagrams, I have to say. These are not spontaneously drawn diagrams, but they are image iconic of the diagrams that people know. So here you see them in the background. There are these nodes. They go down like this. This is a branching structure of syntactic structure. And she is so much immersed in this that she sometimes becomes the tree herself, right? She also said, I don't have that clip, but she said the problem with syntactic tree structures and family trees is, of course, that they are always upside down, and she goes upside down. So I'm just, that's maybe some aspect of mimicry that you have not considered that much, but I think the human body does all that and moves between the concrete and the abstract constantly. You know, it's nothing special. No, there's not.
The noun phrase, which branches to the person on the left and noun on the right. So basically, the left side of the rule tells you the category that's at the top of your tree trunk.
So when she goes like this, she really, like, you know, that's representing, she becomes part of the tree trunk, right? This means this is more of an embodiment than what she does now, just tracing these branches.
And the right side of the rule tells you what it branches out to and the order in which
these elements proceed. So you have this and you have this. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about indices. This I need to show you because this is the beats. Indices are indexical gestures which are pointing gestures. There's a lot of research on that. I don't think that's so important for this context. These are beats. That means these, when you talk and you give some accents to what you are saying or you highlight some structure of your discourse. And there are politicians that we could imitate just like this, who do this all the time. And you wonder whether they accentuate anything or what this is about.
Wir haben immer gesagt, wir brauchen die Regulierung, die internationale Regulierung der Finanzmärkte, weil alles andere in einer Katastrophe führt. Sie verlangen von uns immer, ja, ich werde es Ihnen gleich beweisen, Sie verlangen von uns
ich werde es Ihnen beweisen von uns, Deiktik.
Einmal diese kleine Ehrlichkeit hier zu sagen, Sie haben sich zutiefst geirrt und die Linken...
Okay, das reicht. But you see, a lot of things are going on there, and emblems. You also know where this comes from. So this is a nice metonymy, right? Because it is a cruel metonymy, actually. You know, it's like everybody knows who this is. But this is der Jackenschnitt, der ist unverkennbar. Naja, auf jeden Fall, this is, of course, a typical emblem, just to conclude the typology. What I want to point out about this, and we can talk about more, is there is work on gesture and also experimental work. And what is important here is what I try to highlight is that mimicry is a repetition of somebody else's behavior, but of course it's selective. It's never total. Also that is partial, right? And you wonder what are the elements that are being picked out of somebody else's behavior? Are these the salient elements, for example? So that's interesting. So they also this study here found out, it's also McNeil group, that if somebody looks at a gesture at a video where people talk and gesture, and this person mimics a lot, then the person retelling that account also mimics more, right? So there is some mirroring going on there. And then what I also like is this idea by McNeil himself, that if you take on the gesture of somebody else, then you kind of go into the other's world of meaning. That means you appropriate some of these elements that somebody just very personally talked about, you know. So if that is also an aspect. And this is also interesting. This is a study where they showed they showed two subjects videos in which people talk in gestured, and they produce sometimes gestures that were congruent with the speech, that matched the speech content-wise, and sometimes when they didn't. And when these people had to retell what they saw, they mimicked a lot more the consistent packages of language and gesture than the inconsistent. That means, you know, how complex this is and how integrated this is and how good we are at picking this collaboration between these different modes. We are very good at integrating these. And Holler is Judith Holler, also a very good gesture researcher. This is a very nice study, very recent. She looked at also whether the people who retold somebody else's story, basically, whether they use the same mode of representation for those mimicking gestures. So is it molding, is it drawing, is it enacting, you know, is there also some mirroring going on? So that is really fine scaled. And this idea of common ground, I think, is really interesting, and also the idea of acceptance. So when I mimic somebody else, I probably won't do that if I'm not, you know, if I don't align with this internally. Or if I want to, I mean, irony, of course, is also important. So this is really very complex. But this shared understanding is being built by these mutual processes. I'm concluding. These are just the points I would like to point out that I from my own perspective, find interesting. That's metonymy, the partiality of representation, viewpoint, the essence. You know, gestures very often really give the essence of things. That can be mimetic too. Gestures are motivated, they are relative, and they are relevant. They show you what's relevant to somebody's talk on both sides. And abstraction processes are also important because, as I said before, gestures are highly abstract. Maybe there's a continuum between total mimesis, very rich images, and these very abstract ideas, illusions, minimal information. Then the indexical anchorage, the grounding of these intersubjective processes, I would say, is also important. And then is it a mimetic of what? Of something that we have seen and observed, or whether it's cultural, or, you know, or something of ideas, conceptual structure, metaphors. And then the perspective of the interpreter is this interaction, joint action, common ground. Alignment is also an important word now in our field of multimodal communication. This is completely different. But we wonder whether this is mimetic. I have compared sign constitution and gesture and cubism, and this is also about the essence, and you wonder how mimetic this is. And even if it's not representational, if you really think about it, there is a lot of essence of everyday objects and relationships right there. And this, I'm not going to go into this, and I'm going to thank you for your attention.